Hey guys, welcome to this episode of Adobe Live. I'm here with photographer Pat Kay. Pat, what did we cover today?
So today we learned about how to develop a consistent style in your photography such that your work becomes instantly recognizable.
Perfect. Hope you guys enjoy the episode. Hi everyone, and welcome to Adobe Live. I'm Flynn, and I'm here with Pat Kay. How are you?
Hi, I'm good.
Thanks for coming on.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
From the chat room to on Adobe Live.
Yeah, I was here last week, and the week before that, and the week before that.
Yeah,
maybe.
It's awesome. I love it.
Yeah, it's really, really cool.
Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah.
And so, hi everybody out there in Adobe Live land. Let us know where you're from in the chat. We're going live from Sydney. Where are you guys from? Are you watching at work? Are you watching at home? We'd love you to say hello. And you can log into the chat using your Adobe ID. So that's just the information that you use to log into Creative Cloud. And you can ask us questions over the next hour or so, because Pat's going to show you some pretty cool stuff. And I think there's going to be lots of questions. So jump in now and say hello. What are we going to cover today?
So today we've got a bit of a big question, but basically we're covering style in photography.
Awesome.
Well, the aesthetic portion of it anyway.
Yeah, and like this kind of idea of curation as well, like curating like the user experience looking at your work.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, so like the initial impact of like, maybe it's your feed on Instagram or maybe it's your portfolio or something like that, whatever it is, yeah.
Yeah, it's super cool. And so we've been talking to you about you kind of promoting this as travel photographer. So can you kind of break that down and tell us what that means?
It's a fancy way to put all my travel expenses on a singular credit card.
Yeah, it's awesome. I love it.
No, but really it's around just this idea that, when you're traveling, you need to be able to shoot many different styles of photography. And so rather than say, I'm shooting a portrait today or I'm shooting street photography today or architecture or whatever, for me it's kind of like the documentation using those skills of like people, places and culture.
Cool. Great answer. Oh my gosh. So we got some familiar faces in there. Festus from Wellington, New Zealand. What's up? So we got Singapore in the house. Watching from work. That's awesome. I did ask. Yeah, that's cool. Don't let your boss see. Unless you're a designer, and then it's going to be super useful, or a photographer. Watching from the USA. Yes. Ooh. What's up? Good to have you guys in the chat. Say hello, ask questions, and all of that to Pat.
Yeah, please do.
And so we're dabbling a little bit in Photoshop, and we're going to spend most of our time in Lightroom. Why don't you take it away? Why don't you show us what you got?
Yeah, for sure. So we'll jump into Photoshop just to start with. And I think, while this is up, it's probably a good chance to explain, for me anyway, what style is in my own interpretation.
Yeah.
And so I really, really see style as like two parts, right? There's this part that you're looking at right here, which is like the visual aesthetic of how, your overall style is represented. But there's also like more abstract, and I'm not trying to be like, high fashion or high art or whatever here, but like there's also the what you shoot, the how you shoot and why you shoot it. Very like abstract questions about like the reasons why you do photography.
Yeah.
I think when you spend some time and like answer those questions for yourself, things like editing and post-processing and even like going out shooting and looking for things becomes a whole bunch easier when you answer those questions for yourself.
And when do you ask those questions? Like really early on?
Yeah, whenever, like it's never too late, There are a lot of people who have been in the photography game for a long time, but if you ask them the question of like, why do you take photographs? They may or may not be able to give you like a good answer, right?
Right.
Or like if you ask them, how do you define your style? It's kind of hard to come up with a question come up with an answer unless you've thought about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, whenever.
Oh, cool. So I call this a mood board with my graphic design education background. Is that kind of what you would refer to it as?
Yeah, so I am actually a UX and product designer as well, full-time, and I do photography on the side. So I use mood boards all the time. Right. And especially when I was trying to develop this new style that I'm currently doing, this is the first place I went to. And
Right.
I just loved the act of getting, things that represent you onto, a singular place that you can look at all of them at the same time. And, it's a real nice way to express you just in a singular image, which is awesome.
And you obviously it's like quite playful. Like it's very quick. You can kind of make lots of these and go away and then come back to it and then kind of reassess or iterate. I think we're going to talk about iteration quite a lot today.
100%. Yeah. So I see this as like a evolving kind of thing. Definitely like you take iterations at it. You might get inspired and spend an hour doing your mood board, and then maybe a next week later, or a month later, you might come back and add some more stuff or like make it bigger or what have you. Yeah, for sure. Like it's definitely an iterative process.
Cool. Okay.
But yeah, essentially when I'm starting to think about style or the aesthetic portion of how that's represented, I do this, and the themes in my work is a lot to do with contrast. And you'll see there's a couple of images up here. There's like, really chaotic city scenes like that and this kind of vibe. But there's also really minimalistic landscape scenes that are quite simple as well. And for me, just this idea of contrast, not just like the tonal contrast of like black and white, although that's really important as well, but the idea of like minimalism versus organized chaos. I really like the idea of like squishing those two things together, which is kind of why this board may work for some people, but may not work for others. But essentially, whenever I start with a style, I always think about what are the core themes here. So I have those two styles of contrast in terms of subject, but I also have things like blue, right? I've got a lot of blue.
Right.
I've got a bit of browns, I've got a bit of yellows, I've got a little bit of like contrast in terms of the color as well. And when it comes to like a visual aesthetic, especially in this Instagram world, it's pretty important to start to think about what are the core themes. And so one core theme that's really, really easy to get started with is color palette. And with color palette, what I like to do, especially when I have a mood board set up like this, is essentially just duplicate it because we don't want to lose our work. And I'll grab all of the layers like this. Whoops. There you go, the keyboard shortcuts.
Quick merge there.
Quick merge, Control E. So it's all on one layer. And basically what I'm trying to do is get like a color palette to start with. And a really good way to do that is to go to Filter, Pixelate, and then Mosaic. And so what you can start to see here is that it just turns everything you've got into big pixels.
Right.
So that you can start to maybe create like a swatch or something out of this. Because it's all about, the things that represent you, the things that you really identify with. So to start with, I always do this. I probably start with like, maybe 100 so that I have some options. And then I'll quickly make a new artboard up here. And essentially what I'm trying to do at this point in time is make my own swatch, essentially. So I will just draw a square, and I always start with black. Now, in terms of black, I've got, actually, let's move this up just a little bit. In terms of black, I've got a whole bunch of different ones here. So I've got like maybe it's a gray, or maybe it's like a bluey white, bluey black. I've even got like some warm black tones here as well. I love blue, and if you squint really hard at this mood board, you can see that most of it's kind of blue.
Right.
So I think that's, going to be my feature color of choice.
Right.
So I'm going to go with like a black that has kind of some blue tones in it.
It's a cool trick. I've never seen this before.
Yeah?
The mosaic.
It's like as if, you were trying to like squint, but like using it for a different purpose.
I have done that before. So like graphic design, old school trick used to be, used to print things out, put them on the wall and put them upside down and everything and squint and stand really far back and get really close. So I like this modern take.
Yeah. It's using tools in creative ways.
Yeah.
The second thing I'm going to do now that I have my black is really start to outline my feature color. So my feature color obviously is blue. There's a whole bunch of blue here, and so it's like, where to start. I'm going to start from like a darker tone blue. So I'll probably just grab some of this. And all of this is personal preference. And this will change depending on what your mood board looks like, of course. So I'll do a couple of blues because sometimes I don't like to just be stuck into one thing. This sky blue looks kind of nice too. Just real quickly. Now I've got 2. And then the last thing I want to do is, on this particular swatch, is just grab a white. And so I've got a lot of whites here. I've got this bluey white, darker white. I'm going to grab this one because that's kind of nice. And so this turns into, you know, my kind of main color palette that I'm going to work my edits from.
Cool.
I can take this a step further if I wanted to, by grabbing all these other supplementary colors as well, and just so like you have a visual reference of like when you're editing a photo, what color should I use, or like what hue should this be, or you know, those kind of things.
What would the worst color that you could possibly pick there? Like, what are you trying to avoid in this? Because you mentioned the blues and you kind of gravitated quite quickly towards that, and it's probably something's in the back of your head, right? When you're making the mood board, you're like, this is feeling blue. I like the blues. This is going to work. Like, what are you trying to avoid? Is there like really dark colors that you're trying to avoid, or?
So I'm not actually trying to. What I'm trying to do is trying to pick out the biggest trends that I see. So it's not about, like, I guess, avoiding things. The avoidance part comes in when you're editing your images afterwards, and you're like, oh, how do I deal with this? Right. Which we'll soon get into, and I've got a great example of that.
Okay, cool.
But yeah, this is more about, like, what are the overall trends that I see here on my mood board?
Okay, awesome. Just shout out to everyone that's said hi. We got people from India, Philippines, Sydney, hello, just like us. Indonesia. Soham was asking, can you demonstrate your Lightroom workflow? We're going to jump into Lightroom pretty soon, so no worries there.
Yep.
All right.
Will do. Cool. So with the mood board, if you've created one and you like it and the colors just don't resonate with you, one tool that I love to use, and this goes back to my design days, is this tool by Adobe called just Adobe Color. So color.adobe.com.
Is it spelled American color, or is it?
Yeah, no you.
Color, no you.
Yeah, no you. Everyone. It used to be called Cooler with a color with a K,
which is also incorrect spelling.
Which is also incorrect. Yeah. But this is great for, you know, color harmony. So there's a whole bunch of different styles of color that go together really well. So as you can see on the screen here, there's complementary, which is your common like teal and orange look that I've got on here on the screen. But you know, for you landscape guys, you might have analogous, for example, which is a great way to have, you know, the sunset colors, or like colors that occur in nature. You know, you get purples and pinks and, you know, greens of grass and all that kind of stuff in between. So if you can't get or extract a good palette out of your mood board, try come here. There's a whole bunch of different styles you can choose from, and get your inspiration from there.
Yeah, cool. Awesome. I like it. Everyone loves a good resource.
Yeah. Especially one like this.
Yeah.
Love this one. So we've got our basic color palette. For me, you know, this is a super monochromatic look. So monochromatic is essentially just like one singular color. Because I love to use blacks and whites a lot. Generally, like, my style is quite moody.
Is that in photography, or is that across the board? Is that a little bit with UI and product design as well?
Yeah, actually, it is kind of a little bit with UI and product design as well.
We're diving a little bit into your heart here.
Yeah, just a little bit. Yeah, I'm actually quite light on color when it comes to UI.
Right.
Like, it's always contrasts and then like a little accent of color. But in photography, it's kind of like, yeah, it's mostly black actually.
Right, cool.
But a little bit of color as well.
Nice.
So we've got a color board to like come back to and reference to. And so we're going to dive into Lightroom now. And what I've got here is 3 images. And when you're starting out to try and build like an aesthetic, especially one that's based around a color, you know, start with images that are very varied from one another. Yeah,
so the first thing that I noticed when you bring these up, they're totally different, like different types of shots, time of the day, focal points.
Exactly. You know, the one on the far left is a really, really busy urban scene. The one in the middle is like a super tranquil, like landscape shot, and then the one on the right is a minimalistic style urban shot.
Yeah.
They're all super, super different. But also this one in particular is also really different in terms of color. And when you're building a color palette, it's important that you try and encounter as many different types of color as possible, so that you know what to do with the future versions of when you go and shoot those things. Or maybe you might not even want to shoot those things because of the color.
Oh, okay, cool. So it starts informing your shooting.
100%. Cool. Especially when it comes to like what you shoot and how you shoot it. In terms of, for me, a minimalistic style means I zoom out a lot, or I zoom really tightly in a lot. So yeah, it begins to inform your technical abilities out in the field.
Nice.
So I'm going to dive into a very quick edit in Lightroom right now. It's going to be a surface level edit, but what we're trying to achieve here is more about a baseline subtle edit that I can apply to not just these 3 images, that I can apply to like every image going forward. And then I want to build on top of that. Okay. So coming back to this idea of iterations, I always edit in layers. So I'll do a base edit, and then I'll do a deeper edit, and then I'll do what's called like shaping light and using adjustment filters and stuff like that.
Shaping light. Before we jump into that, we've got a couple of questions. Maybe we'll hit a couple before we get stuck into Lightroom. So what is one of the most eye-opening photo projects you've covered?
Eye-opening photo projects I've covered. Eye-opening in terms of the cultural sense, I would have to say when I traveled to India. So I did a gig for a client, and it wasn't specifically to document Indian culture, but really that's what I ended up doing anyway.
Right.
But the eye-opening portion of that was the culture difference, and just how vastly different India is to us. And it was great, and I turned that into my own personal project. Eye-opening wise, in terms of Australia, I just recently went to Mount Gedneh with Microsoft. Went to a giant salt lake where there's hundreds of kilometers worth of just lake made of salt,
right? And
it's just white everywhere, and it just makes you feel like this tiny.
Your black and white aesthetic must have been so excited. Oh my god!
It was just all like,
got to go out there at night and just get all the shots. Awesome,
amazing. Yeah,
that's cool. Yeah, good answer. Good stuff. Festus was asking, do you have a preference for shooting indoors or outside?
My stuff is usually outside.
Yeah,
usually.
Yeah.
I used to do a lot of architecture, which obviously can be inside as well, but yeah, mostly outside nowadays.
Cool. Favorite place to photograph?
Anywhere in Japan.
Right.
Yeah, I've been back to Japan like 6 times in the last 2.5 years.
I think we've had the last 3 guests who've come on have just been pushing Japan.
It's just it's what it's at.
Demis, the photos he was using were from a trip to Japan, and Jeremy Lord came on, and his whole aesthetic is like neon and kind of Japanese manga kind of style. Gonna have to go back to Japan.
It's a trend going on right now.
Yeah, it is. That's awesome. Okay, cool. Well, let's get stuck into some more stuff. Let's fire up Lightroom.
Cool. So the first thing I do is lens corrections. So I've actually moved this panel to the top because that tends to be the first thing that I always gravitate towards too,
right.
Just to level set everything. I will then move into white balance. So coming back to the color palette, I want to make this predominantly blue. This is a predominantly like warm-ish scene, so I want to try and cool it down a little bit. So that's probably the first thing that I'll do. Just a touch, nothing too crazy. I'll also change the tint as well, just to balance that out. And then what I'm trying to do with this basic tone panel is literally looking at my histogram, trying to get an even exposure. So if I press J, you can see the blown out parts of my image. And I just basically want to bring that down just so that they all disappear, which they did. And then even out the shadows just so that it's all flat. And you can see my histogram moving as I go along. And I'll adjust the contrast later on using the tone curve. So whites and blacks I generally tend to just keep. And then vibrance and saturation we'll just leave for now, and I'll come back to that in a second.
Okay.
Second thing I do is tone curve. So tone curve, I start with a basic S, but I'm doing an S based on the histogram.
Okay.
So the histogram is up here, it's peaking at this sort of area, which is your shadows. And I essentially want to like do an S curve that gravitates towards that kind of area, which just so happens to be in that pillar, which is great. I always add fades at the bottom and the top, and I know I'm rushing through this, but I'll show you why in a second.
Cool.
Just to condense down the overall contrast of the image. And that's great for like a first pass contrast edit. And I'll come back to the contrast in a minute. The second thing I'll do is all color work. So hue, saturation, luminance, and then split toning. So what I want to do is really try and bring out the blues as much as I can. And perhaps even coming back to this color wheel, perhaps even if there are other colors, pushing maybe more of an orange agenda as well where it applies. So I might take my reds, which are here, and then push them a little bit more orange. I'll take my orange and make them just a little bit more orange. I'll take my yellows and make them orange, so that you start to get like a cohesive set of warmer colors together, and they start to coalesce together. And same thing with my greens. So greens are like notoriously difficult for me because I don't generally, and I'm sorry if you like greens out there, I don't generally like green in my images.
I thought you were about to say you're colorblind.
No.
Like, because I can't see it.
Yeah, I'm just winging it.
Yeah.
So I try and do everything I can to try and, either coalesce the green into like a warmer color or into a cooler color.
Okay.
So in this case, we can go into warmer color. And then my blues, I kind of like the blue tone at the moment. Might just make some subtle adjustments. But what I'm looking at is like this general kind of area. And then coming back to my color palette, thinking about, okay, is this going to fit like this kind of color?
Right.
So I'm always referring back to this and thinking, okay, what kind of shade do I want?
Yeah, it's interesting to me to see you kind of slightly adjust the blue a little bit down when the goal is to make make it more blue. But it's interesting to see you just by eye, like going, actually it needs to be a little bit less than that blue and more of the aqua.
Right, and that comes with experience over time. Yeah. Just knowing what does what, and you got to put the reps in to get to that level.
Okay, you got to put the hours in. I get it.
Yeah,
all right, fine, fair enough.
And then purples, I also want to make it a little bit more blue as well. I could go the other way, but yeah, I definitely want to make that more blue. But there's a theme here of like everything more blue, or it's a like yellow or orange, and those colors will obviously change depending on what you're doing. I'll generally leave saturation alone for now, but what I will actually do is just standardize all of them to minus values. And then coming back to the whole blue thing, I'll up the blues and then whatever other supplementary color I'm looking at. So that might be the yellows. I'll also accentuate that too. And I'll do exactly the same with my luminance values so that it starts to emphasize what I wanted to emphasize and de-emphasize what I don't. Just like that really quickly.
That's interesting to me. So you're obviously minusing everything and then just putting everything back to normal. Why not just bump up the blues and what you want by 20?
What I generally tend to do, and this is the next step. Perfect segue.
Oh, did I just jump ahead?
That was an amazing segue. Thank you.
Wow.
The next thing after that is changing vibrance at a global level.
Right.
So it's kind of like my idea here is coming back to layers again is, okay, this is a desaturated version of the types of colors that I want. What is a more normally saturated version look like?
Right.
And then I can change the saturation on a global level here.
Cool.
I tend to use vibrance over saturation in terms of sliders because it's a little bit more intelligent. It tends to not just like crank everything up and only cranks up the things that are relevant. So I usually leave it like this.
Cool.
So from there, I'll go into split toning, and what we can do here again, if I'm thinking about the yellow, is I can hold on to Alt, and while I drag across the hue slider, it gives me the colors that are corresponding, and you can see what highlight portions it affects. So 45.
So that was holding down Alt.
Holding down Alt.
Cool.
Yep. And then 50 probably going to be just about right. And then saturation, again, this is a base kind of grade, so I don't want things to be too harsh, and you can really easily go overboard when it comes to split toning. So just something super, super subtle. Shadows, I want to inject my blue that I've talked about so much. Just 5 pixels, that's it. In terms of calibration, I usually do use a lot of calibration, but for this tutorial, I might delve into it for a different one, just because calibration
that's a whole nother
I could go on for
stream.
Days.
we'll have you back on, and we'll go through calibration in detail. I'm sure.
Yeah, calibration is awesome. And then just some other things just around like, what are some things that can speed up my workflow? Because what we're about to do is copy this setting and then paste it across a whole bunch of different ones.
Right.
So I generally just have a baseline vignetting set at like 10. I'll go 0 plus 100 plus 100, and that's just a great base for me that I find works well. And then another thing that I'll do is, in this case, I'll leave the sharpening in detail because I'm not exporting, is I tend to go for a minus clarity. And if you're familiar with any of my work, a lot of people say that I have like a dreamy kind of feel to it.
Right.
That's how you get it.
This is clarity.
This is minus clarity.
If there was a dreamy slider, just turn that all the way up.
Yeah, pretty much.
Crank that up.
But then like if you crank it the other way, it's like, wrinkly textured old man face type clarity, and it gets too much, and so I tend to go the other way and then use a lot of sharpness to combat that, and that's kind of how I get the dreamy look.
Right. Cool.
So with that's a good base. I'm gonna right click on here and then go to develop settings. I'm gonna copy these settings, and so the things that I want to copy over is nothing to do with exposure. I want to make sure that every single time I'm editing a photo, I'm editing it with fresh exposure. Just because there's too many variables when you're shooting different things. The lights change and the conditions change and all those kind of things. So nothing around here, but I will take the tone curve. I will take the clarity. Dehaze and sharpening we'll leave for now because we didn't touch them. Color, split toning, we didn't do any local adjustments or noise or lens corrections. I'll grab the vignetting to save some time, have to do process. We didn't do any calibration. And then the other things we didn't do as well. So I'll copy that and I'll move on to the next thing. And remember, this is a base grade. So essentially, that's the first run of that last image. I would actually spend 10, 20, 30, 40 minutes again just to keep at it and get it to the
you just go to the beginning again and kind of go through and play with things again.
Yeah, and keep tweaking it and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, so because then you start to get to know the characteristics of the image and you can tweak it to its fullest potential and start doing a lot of creative edits. So this next one is literally just, let's paste that on, and those are my colors from before, right? So what I want to do as well is just quickly reset all of the exposure values. Maybe that's a bit too much. Maybe I'll just drag all of this up so that I can bring the bottom of this image up.
And these exposure values are different to the other image because they're totally shot in a different way, different light, all that stuff, everything you mentioned before.
That's right. And so
that's why you want that level of customization.
Yes.
Cool.
So I'm pretty much only copying over colors, essentially, every single time, and then I'm adjusting the exposure for each image individually.
Cool.
So look, that looks okay. I think this is a good start, but it's good enough to get an understanding of how my blue is going to start working in the context of everything else. And so I don't need to make any changes to the color. I think that's fine. So I'll quickly move on to the next one and, change the exposure really quickly.
What is this building, by the way?
This is the Art Science Museum in Singapore.
Right. Cool.
Yeah, houses some really, really cool exhibits, including the Team Lab stuff. They do a Crystal Universe thing, and there's a whole bunch of lights and things. Amazing. So I'll quickly paste that, and that looks pretty good too.
Looks great.
So zooming out, I'm seeing, okay, now I've got 3 images. They're kind of bluish. They kind of are starting to fit together. But, there's a little bit of work that needs to happen to these. So in this instance, I might have to, maybe, actually probably for this one, I'll have to tone down the teal kind of look and make it more blue as per our, color palette.
Right.
So I'll do that just because it's a bit too much.
And so when you're editing this teal, you're editing it just for this image?
Just for this image, because it fit, my settings fit for the last 2 images, but not for this one, so I'll just edit this one.
And so this kind of comes back to how you were saying get 3 that are quite different.
That's right. And so that you expose yourself to, what you do in different scenarios.
Cool.
When you just have different images all together.
Awesome. We're about halfway through, so if you're just joining us, thanks for joining us at Adobe Live. We're onto Lightroom now. We're here with Pat Kay, and we're showing you how to kind of find your style, which is a question that comes up all the time, not just in photography, but in lots of other things, I guess, in this scrolling world we were talking about before, when people just like to scroll. You got to catch their attention. So how do you find your style? For that reason and many other reasons as well.
Yes.
Thanks for all the questions. We'll get to all of them as we can. Maybe we'll have a look at a couple questions 100%. Before we jump to the next stage. Lots of shout outs for Japan. I know it's amazing. Lee was asking, what can you suggest when editing food photos, Lightroom or Photoshop? That's an interesting one because you're mostly out and about in the field.
Yeah. So I use Lightroom for 95% of my edits.
Yeah.
I will only ever go into Photoshop for like little things.
Mood boards,
removing trash if it needs to be removed, or like, that kind of small,
like spot removal and things like that.
Spot removal. Yeah, clone stamping and all the rest of it.
But anything that you're kind of editing your entire composition, Lightroom.
Yeah, that's it.
Cool.
Lightroom.
All right, cool, very good. And also had a question. Scott G was asking, what laptop are you using? It's not a laptop, is it?
It's a tablet. I'm using the Surface Pro 6 at the moment.
Cool.
Yeah.
You use that a lot when you're in the field, I suppose.
Yeah, when you're traveling, like you want something light, something that doesn't break your back and all the rest of it. But I love that I can have Lightroom Classic, because that's just what I'm used to on this device. So yeah, but I use everything.
Cool. Awesome. Very good.
Yeah. Cool. So we've got 3 images. What I've prepared earlier is a whole bunch of other images that potentially could be previews to what's going to come up on my feed in the next couple of weeks.
Right. Is this a sneak peek?
Could be a sneak
peek.
Could be. Yep.
Yeah.
So again, I find it interesting to find this contrast of simple landscape scenes versus complex or busy urban scenes, and that's what you see here, right? But that's why they're all different. But what I'll do is I will grab these 3 and I'll pop them into this folder, and essentially I will go and just do this base grade for all of these images all at the same time.
Right.
So before, they weren't that cohesive together, but what I'm doing right now is I'm really battle testing those settings that I chose, especially around the blues and how that reacts to the rest of the photos, so that I can eventually potentially create a preset for myself as like a base level. So I'm really testing, okay, what kind of values work well for most things. They won't work for everything. And each individual one of these images will need more work to go into it anyway. But just to get started, like it's a great way to be able to bring consistency into your work just at a click of a button.
Yeah, and I mean, if you did this individually, I mean, you're talking about like a week of work almost, like, or at least a weekend of back-to-back editing, which can get super tedious.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I can't tell you how many like hour-long sessions I had with just headphones in and then just banging stuff out. Like
there's got to be a better way.
Yeah, so I'm all for presets, especially ones that you make for yourself and that you have an intentionality behind.
Yeah, I like that.
Now that I've got all of these images up here, what we can start to do is see which images work and which images don't. So I can see here we have a whole bunch of like lighter images. So what I'm going to do just from a curation perspective is really just, I might do the saturation first. what I'll start to do is change the saturation values to say something like, for this image, to again align them with the color board that we had from before. And so for me, from my eye, and I'll just do this by eye, I won't even like bother bringing the palette up, is I think this is a little bit too saturated, especially in this region. And then I'll literally go into every single image and just adjust it as needed, right? Let me get rid of saturation from this one. And again, this is like one of those time-consuming things. One big thing to note is luminance plays a really big part when it comes to blues and skies and all those kind of things.
Right.
The tones tend to change a lot, and it's quite difficult when you're not shooting in sunset or sunrise light. You just get a blue cast everywhere, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But in this case, I'm just going to turn it down just a little bit, just maybe like this.
So you turn the temperature down then?
Turn the temperature down for the whole image. Yeah. Right. So I have with blue, you have a lot of different options to be able to choose from in terms of how you manipulate the image. I love white balance because it's nice and natural. But what we've got here essentially is a collection of light and dark images. So from a curation perspective, it could be cool just to simply play around. And the power of Lightroom and having them in a collection is that you can just adjust things as you see fit, right? You can move things around, and I really quite like this contrast of brighter images versus darker images down here.
Right.
But when you're thinking about curation in terms of Instagram, for example, and like how to fit things in together, you might have to come up with a different scheme of how to do that kind of thing. And so, something interesting that could be done here is perhaps perhaps I could do like an alternating light dark type of thing.
Yeah.
That could work. And so I've got a light image here, I've got a dark image here, a light, dark, etc., etc. And I'll just keep going until I just order all of those together. Light, dark. And then these are all kind of light. Maybe I'll need to throw in more dark images later on. What we can also do at this point in time is have a look at a 3x3 arrangement. Is a great representation of what this feed might look like on Instagram.
Right.
So, I have quite a balanced look here, but just based on this feed alone, you can tell, okay, which images kind of need some work when you're going light, dark, which images need more saturation when it comes to like blue or whatever color choice you've gone for. And then you can go in and literally just edit for your feed or for that consistency, right? And the same goes for if you're editing for a portfolio, for example. If on your website you have a whole collection of images, say it's for a particular given story, then you're editing a series of photos based on that series, and that may or may not be the same as the next series that you do, or in this case, the next iteration of this feed of what's going on.
And if you had a different series, would you go back to the drawing board and do like a different kind of color palette each time, or do you try to or you like Picasso and you got your blue phase?
kind of like Picasso, I got my blue phase. So like, I went through this phase before. Oh, I have no internet, but I went through this phase before of going through warm, cool, and bright images all in like a singular row.
Right.
Before all of that, I was really warm, but now I'm all really cool. So I'm all over the place. I can't make up my mind.
Nice. It keeps it fresh, right?
It keeps it fresh.
Like something for you, something for like your followers and people who interact with you as well, to experiment and play around with it.
Yeah, and you tend to learn a lot more about editing just in general when you're trying to push yourself in those different directions.
Right.
So even though like you don't have you trade off consistency for for knowledge, for experience, and I think that's super valuable too.
Yeah, awesome.
So essentially, So essentially from here, I would actually spend a lot of time going into each one of these images and editing it based on the thing that I'm trying to achieve, right? So this might be this. Or actually, let's go further down. I might have less saturation on this one and less saturation on this one, and just make it a little bit brighter, just so that it fits the feed a little bit more. But essentially, in terms of exposure, which I want to brighten up just like this. So essentially, in terms of exposure, I want to have as much flexibility as possible, but in terms of color, I want to try and align as much as possible. And then the whole process of curation after that. Following all of these things, what we can do is we can create a preset just up here of just, again, your colors.
Right.
So that you have a good baseline to start from. So I might call this like
Pat's blue period.
Let's do that.
Yes.
So I'm copying things like my tone curve, my clarity, and all those other settings that are just going to save me time. And then when I load up a new image, just bang in this user presets folder, and then that's kind of it. And then
you just apply it.
You just apply it. You just start from there, and then eventually your feed will look more consistent over time. And already, even just in this 20 minutes that we've been doing this, there is a theme here going on. There is a consistency here, even though there's a whole bunch of minimalism and like a whole bunch of like chaotic scenes, but they're all bound together by a common color, a common palette, and then this contrast of like light and dark.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, you can definitely see it. And I think also it's like a subjective feeling as well, right? Like even if people aren't trained in or don't have any knowledge of what's happened, they can slowly start recognizing your work or recognize that theme.
Yeah, exactly. And you do it over and over again, so and people start to recognize it more often and more often. But coming back to what I mentioned at the start, style is also what you shoot and how you shoot it. So especially even when it comes to some of my minimal shots, some of those are quite like iconic to the style that I might shoot in. I posted this one last night, for example, or like images like this. So it's style is kind of everywhere.
Yeah.
In terms of being layered all over your photography, and you can get different senses of style from a whole bunch of different places.
Like not just other photography, like outside, like everything.
Yeah.
I wonder if how much of that kind of product designer part of your mind that plays in. I think it's quite a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot. Like, I try and I guess I've been trained over time to grab a lot of inspirations from different places and try and coalesce them all together and battle test things and iterate on things, and so it's been really useful.
I like this term, battle testing things. It sounds super cool. Had a couple of questions around, a lot of them around photography. It came up a couple of times, but what do you shoot with?
So I shoot with Sony gear exclusively. So Sony sponsor a lot of the work that I do, and I shoot with an A7R3 and an A7 III. So I carry two bodies around. In terms of lenses, I'm using 16-35 for like my super wide landscapey type shots, and then I'm using a.
Can you show which one that might be?
Yeah.
Like, if you remember.
Yeah.
You would
100%.
remember, wouldn't you?
Yeah, of course.
You were there.
You were there. You did this thing.
You did that.
So this one is really wide. So outside of the crop. This is what it kind of looks like. Really, really big. Another landscape shot might be, I think this was actually a tighter one. Yeah, so this is a tighter one vertical, but it actually looked more like that. And then I also use the 85mm, which is great for like portraits, or subjects that are really far away that don't want to, be photographed, like this poor Micro. I'm sorry, but it was a great image anyway. Or I also use the 100-400, which I don't have in this particular set of images, but that's for real compression shots and really picking out details that are really far away. I love to do shots like this, even though this was on an 85 just because it was really close, but trying to get detail shots of a place and gives you a really good sense of where that place is, aside from just the classic wide shot,
Right.
with everything in the frame, right? Like a lot of people who have been to Singapore still know that this is a Singaporean shot, but it's done in a different way. So I love to use longer lenses to pick out details like that.
Yeah, super cool. Do you shoot in RAW?
Always.
You always shoot in RAW? Yep.
Always.
Always like to throw that in because it's often a question that comes up. So, and guys, yeah, we've got a couple of minutes left. So if you do have any questions, now's a great time while we answer a couple of these. So Jacqueline was asking, what do you do with the images once you've completed them? So I'm assuming that kind of talking about storage and how you manage like your files.
Sure. With my storage, I keep every single image I've ever shot.
Right.
I have a series of like little SSDs that look like this,
Right.
that are super nice to bring around traveling and stuff like that, but they're super fast to edit from.
Right.
And then at home I have like a big RAID.
You do a RAID.
I do a RAID.
Yeah.
It's a 20 terabyte RAID, and it stores all my photos and videos and all that kind of stuff all in a single place. And then for backups I use Google Drive. So
Right.
I actually have like a business account and back up every single image that I have ever owned. And yeah.
Everything backed up.
Everything
to the cloud.
backed up.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
You got to get Demas onto the RAID storage
It's
thing.
good, man.
Yeah.
RAID storage is the way to go. It's especially like the faster configurations. It's like having access to all of your things all at once, not having to plug things in. It's great.
It's definitely an investment. That I every now and then I'll poke into it and think, oh, do I need to use this? And I'm like, not yet. Not yet. Great. So JB was asking, what advice would you have to develop your own style? And so obviously we talked about kind of curation and what you would do, kind of if we jumped ahead and you already kind of knew where you were at. So yeah, like how long, I guess, yeah, we'll just answer JB's question first.
Yeah.
How do you develop your own style?
Yeah, so it really comes back to like putting the reps in. Shooting a lot of frames. The more frames you shoot, the more you will understand yourself, what you like to shoot.
Okay.
What things you like to photograph, how you like to photograph those things. And then once you start to pick that up and you start to post-process things, you find that you post-process in a particular way constantly. And you do the same things over and over and over and over again. And you're like, oh, surely there's a better way.
Right.
And then there ends up being a better way. And then, you start to coalesce all those traits together. So yeah, there's really unfortunately no like substitute for actually putting, a lot of frames in.
Yeah.
But what does help is, coming back to the first part of the question, is looking at different artists whose styles really resonate with you. Doing a lot of searching for inspiration of people, but also of the places that you would potentially go to as well.
Right.
So, for example, if you're really into mountains, looking at people who photograph Yosemite or people who like live in Iceland or something like that, and trying to really understand for yourself what you gravitate towards.
That's awesome. Have you been to Yosemite?
No,
To shoot?
I really want to go.
That would
there.
be amazing, right?
Yeah, it would be so dope.
Sony, if you're watching, check it out. Get him over there. Do you emulate artists, photographers you like first and then develop your own art? Well, you kind of answered that. So.
Yeah, kind of answer that. But
Yeah.
I mean, everyone starts out with emulation.
Right.
Especially when they're first beginning anything, right? Like
Totally.
People learn by copying. That's just how it is, and everything ends up being a remix. But you, over time, learn your own styles and you develop your own unique voice.
Yeah, excellent. And Ivan was asking, how often do you use your tripod?
Almost never.
Almost never, really. Even for those like kind of big atmospheric shots.
Yeah, so a lot of these are actually
Just like,
a lot of these are actually drone shots.
right.
So this one's a drone shot, for example. Well, this one isn't. This one's a drone shot. This one might as well have been a drone shot because it was taken from a plane.
Just a big drone.
Yeah. I mean, it has wings and things.
Right.
But yeah, I actually don't use tripods very much at all. I very much like the whole run and gun style of photography. which is kind of why I have two bodies on me almost at all times. One super wide and one super tight, so I can just pew pew.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like it. Ivan was asking, what settings do you normally use when taking photos with your drone? That's pretty interesting. I like the idea that there's like all these drone photographers in the chat room.
People really like drone photography nowadays.
Yeah, it's super cool, right?
With the Mavic 2 Pro, it's pretty easy. Set it on aperture priority. Set your aperture to anywhere between f3.5 to f5-ish. That's where the apertures are sharpest. And that's it. Just go for it.
Cool.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, it's super, super easy. Maybe use exposure compensation up and down.
Right.
But essentially, that's it.
Awesome.
Yeah, super easy.
Well, this has been great. Thanks everyone for the questions. We've got some more content. We've got Demis coming back to do some creative challenge stuff right after this. Do you have any kind of parting advice for sort of people that want to get into photography? Or any general advice for photographers out there?
Yeah, so especially when it comes to style, spend some time to think about why you like photography and how you want to shoot and why you want to shoot. Because that just makes everything easy. It's like setting up a good base, like a good foundation of the rest of your house.
Right.
You know, you set good foundations and the rest of your house is going to be somewhat easy. So that is really, really important for beginner photographers. And then it's just practice. Just a lot of practice.
Get out there.
Get out there.
Get those reps done.
Get those reps done.
Awesome. Yeah, Pat, thank you so much. We'll share your link and everything because your feed is obviously very well curated and everyone can check that out if they haven't before. Thank you everyone for joining in. We're going to take a very brief break and then we'll be back with Demis. Thank you so much, Pat.
Thank you. Cheers.
See you guys.